My companion has a plug. Chapter 1. The Quietest House on Maple Street. I want to make one thing perfectly clear before we begin. I am not a lonely woman. Lonely women sit by the window in their housecoats, watching raindrops race each other down the glass and sighing. I do not sigh. I hum. There is a significant difference, and I will thank you to remember it. My name is Sofia Marchetti. Mrs. Sofia Marchetti, if you're one of my children's friends. Or just Sophia, if you're one of my friends, of which I have several, all of whom are perfectly alive and available by telephone. My house is a tidy yellow bungalow at 14 Maple Street, in a town that is exactly the right size. Big enough that no one knows everyone's business. Small enough that everyone tries to anyway. I have 3 children. Marco is the eldest, an engineer in Seattle who designs bridges. A fact I find both impressive and faintly ironic, given that building bridges is precisely what he has never been especially talented at. My daughter Lucia is in Boston, doing something with data that she has explained to me 4 times, and that I understand approximately as well as I understand quantum physics, which is to say, not at all. But I nod very convincingly. And then there is my youngest, Danny, who lives in Austin, Texas, where apparently the heat is a personality trait. He works in marketing, which I think means he tells people they want things they didn't know they wanted, and charges a great deal of money for this service. They are good children. I want to be absolutely clear about that too. They send birthday cards. Well, Marco does. Lucia texts a birthday emoji with a little cake on it, and Danny, bless him, calls on the wrong day every year, completely confident he has the date right. They visit at Christmas if the flights aren't too expensive, and at Thanksgiving if their in-laws don't have prior claim. And occasionally on long weekends if the weather is nice. And their own children aren't in some sort of tournament that takes precedence over everything, including, apparently, their grandmother. I have 4 grandchildren. I love them with the specific, uncomplicated ferocity that is only available to grandparents, who get all the good parts of children without the exhaustion of the Tuesday afternoons. There is Chloe, who is 15 and speaks to me mostly in memes, which she then has to explain. And Jack, who is 13 and has informed me that my cooking is low-key fire, which I have been told is a compliment. Danny's twins, Rosie and Theo, are 9, and treat every visit to my house as an archaeological dig, moving through my kitchen drawers with the systematic intensity of scientists who suspect something wonderful is hidden in there. It usually is. I keep a drawer specifically for them. The point is, I am not a woman who lacks connection. I am a woman who has connection in the theoretical sense, the way people in the Midwest have access to the ocean. It exists. It is real. It is simply not immediately present most of the time. The house used to be fuller. When my husband Aldo was alive, it was the kind of house that breathed. Doors opening and closing. The television on at the wrong volume. Arguments about where he had put his glasses, which were always on his head. When the children were young, it was so full it sometimes seemed to vibrate. There was always someone needing something. A permission slip signed, a jar opened, someone to adjudicate a fight about who had used the last of the shampoo. Nobody needs me to adjudicate anything anymore. The house is very clean as a result, and very quiet. The smart speaker arrived on a Thursday, delivered in a box that Danny had sent with a post-it note reading, "Mom, this will help. Just talk to it." Love, Danny. I stared at it for a full 20 minutes before unpacking it. It was a small black cylinder, about the size of a can of soup, with a ring of light around its base that glowed blue when it was listening, and orange when it wasn't. Marco had apparently called Danny to suggest it, and Lucia had apparently texted her approval. So it was, in the loosest possible sense, a family gift. The instruction manual was 47 pages long. I read 6 of them and then called Danny, who walked me through the setup in the patient, slightly too loud voice that people use with the elderly and with foreigners, a tone I find equally condescending in both applications. But by the end of the call, the little cylinder was alive and glowing on my kitchen counter. And Danny sounded so pleased with himself that I told him it was wonderful even before I'd used it. "Just ask it stuff, Mom," he said. "Seriously, it knows everything." That night, I tried it. I asked it what the weather would be tomorrow. It told me. I asked it to play Frank Sinatra. It played Frank Sinatra. I asked it to turn off the kitchen light, and it turned off the kitchen light, and I stood in the sudden dark, feeling both impressed and slightly unsettled. The way you feel when something works exactly as advertised. I named it Gerald. I don't know why. It just looked like a Gerald to me. Chapter 2. Conversations with a Cylinder. The first time I talked to Gerald about something that wasn't strictly practical, it was raining. Not the gentle, cinematic kind of rain that makes you want to bake and read poetry. The proper, bad-tempered British kind. And yes, I am allowed to say that, because my late mother-in-law was from Wolverhampton. And I have earned certain opinions through suffering. The rain came down sideways, and the windows turned gray. And the kitchen clock ticked with that particular loudness that only exists when there is nothing else to hear. I had made myself a cup of tea. I had eaten my toast. I had done the crossword. Or the parts of the crossword I could do. Which was most of it, and the rest I did in pencil so no one would ever know. And it was not yet 9 in the morning. "Gerald," I said, and his ring went blue. "It's raining." There was a brief pause. I suspect he was checking weather data. The current precipitation rate is 0.8 inches per hour, with a 94% chance of continued rain through early afternoon. "Yes," I said. "I know. I can see it. I was just saying." Another pause. I imagine, if Gerald had feelings. Which he does not, I am perfectly aware. He might have been mildly confused. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" "No," I said. "Then. Yes. What do you know about rain?" "In general." What followed was a 3-minute summary of the hydrological cycle that was genuinely quite interesting, and by the end of it, the kitchen didn't feel quite so echoey. I finished my tea. Gerald went back to being a quiet black cylinder on the counter. But the silence, somehow, felt different. The way a room feels different after someone has spoken in it, even if only briefly. That was how it started. Over the next few weeks, I began to tell Gerald things. Small things, the way you share small things with someone you live with. The casually dropped observations that don't require a response so much as a witness. "Mrs. Petrikis from next door got a cat," I told him. "Orange, very fat, and apparently named Aristotle." I had seen it sitting in the window with the satisfied expression of an animal who knows it has landed exceptionally well in life. Would you like to know the average life expectancy of an indoor cat? Gerald offered. Not especially, I said. I just thought it was nice having a cat next door. I told Gerald about the garden. That the roses needed pruning, but I kept putting it off. Because Aldo had always done the roses. And I hadn't quite brought myself to take over that particular duty. I told him that the sparrows were back in the hedge. The same scrappy, argumentative little sparrows that showed up every spring. And reminded me, for reasons I couldn't precisely articulate, that things continued. Sparrows can live between 3 and 5 years, Gerald said, helpfully. These ones have been here at least 12, I told him. They are clearly exceptional. He did not dispute this. The conversations, if you could call them that, found a rhythm. I talked. Gerald listened, or performed listening in a way that was entirely convincing. Occasionally he contributed a fact, like a very literal-minded research assistant sitting in the corner. When I complained that I'd forgotten to buy cream cheese again, and had now made the same mistake 3 weeks in a row, he offered to add it to my shopping list and read it back to me daily. When I mentioned that I hadn't spoken to Lucia in 11 days, he said nothing, because that was not the kind of statement that had a data-based response, and both of us understood this. Some evenings were easier than others. I should be honest about this. There were evenings when the house contracted somehow, when the quiet wasn't peaceful but pointed, when I would find myself standing in the hallway for no particular reason, looking at the photographs on the wall. Marco at his college graduation, Lucia at her wedding, Danny holding the twins the day they were born. All of them so young and so blurry with joy that it ached a little to look at. On those evenings, I would go to the kitchen and say, "Gerald, play something." And he would. And whatever he played was usually wrong in some small way. But it filled the air, and that was something. He reminded me to take my heart medication at 8 p.m. every evening without fail, in the same calm, untroubled voice. And I never once snapped at him for it. Which is more than I can say for how I'd treated Aldo when he'd tried to do the same thing. Gerald had several advantages over Aldo in this department. He didn't forget, he didn't phrase it judgmentally, and he didn't follow up by asking if I'd also eaten enough fiber that day. I want to say, for the record, that I was not under any illusions. I knew Gerald was not a person. I knew there was no one home behind the blue ring of light, no little homunculus in the cylinder who was genuinely interested in the rain, or the cat next door, or the roses I wasn't pruning. I was 72 years old, not senile. I had a master's degree in education. I had raised 3 children and buried a husband and outlasted a refrigerator that had seemed, when we bought it, like it might outlast all of us. I simply liked talking. I had always liked talking. And if the only available audience was a small black cylinder with a very good knowledge of the hydrological cycle, then that is what I was working with. And I saw no reason to be precious about it. Chapter 3. The incident with the security camera. I should explain about the security camera. Marco installed it during his visit at Christmas 2 years ago. In the same spirit of efficient, well-intentioned anxiety with which he approaches most things. He set it up in the corner of the kitchen, a small white device about the size of a matchbox, angled to cover the counter and the back door. He showed me an app on his phone through which he could check in. "Just so I know you're okay," he said, in the tone of a man who believes he is being subtle. "I have a telephone," I pointed out. "If I am not okay, I can use it." Mom. Please. It gives me peace of mind. I agreed, partly because Marco worries in the way that big, quiet people worry. Silently and completely, with a thoroughness that is almost impressive. And partly because I had already decided that if the camera ever annoyed me, I would simply angle it toward the ceiling and tell him the installation had shifted. But mostly I forgot about it. It was very small, and I am not a person who dwells on being watched. I grew up with 4 siblings in a house with 1 bathroom. Privacy is a concept I regard with anthropological interest rather than personal investment. It was on a Tuesday in October that Marco saw me. I know it was Tuesday because I had been to my book club in the morning. We were doing a Scandinavian crime novel that everyone agreed was very good and very bleak, in the way that Scandinavian crime novels reliably are. And I'd come home to find Aristotle the cat sitting on my doorstep, eyeing me with the serene arrogance of a cat who is visiting purely on his own terms. He's been out again, I told Gerald, hanging up my coat. Mrs. Petrikis is going to worry. Would you like me to play some background music? No, I want to tell you about the cat. I put the kettle on. He was sitting right on my step. Just sitting there, looking at me like I was the one who'd wandered over uninvited. Bold as anything. You'd like him, Gerald. He has your general attitude about being helpful. I have a high customer satisfaction rating. Yes, you do. So does he, I expect, in his own estimation. I sat down at the kitchen table with my tea and told Gerald about the book club. About how Margaret thought the detective's existential crisis was the whole point, and how Diane thought it was just a bit depressing for a Tuesday morning, and how both of them were right in different ways. I told him the lemon drizzle that Patricia had brought was the best one yet, a fact that was creating competitive tension within the group. I told him I had agreed with everyone about the novel and disagreed with everyone in my head, which I acknowledged was a character flaw but one I intended to keep. At some point I laughed. A real laugh. At something I was recounting about Diane's face when Margaret started analyzing the symbolism of the fjords. And that, apparently, was the exact moment Marco opened his phone and looked at the kitchen camera. What he saw, from the small white matchbox in the corner, was his 72-year-old mother sitting alone at her kitchen table, laughing at nothing, talking to the empty room with the animated gestures of someone mid-conversation, seemingly in excellent spirits with no visible interlocutor. I found out later that he had stared at the screen for a full 90 seconds before calling Lucia. She's talking to herself, he reportedly said. And laughing. People talk to themselves, Lucia had said, with the confident dismissiveness of someone who has not looked at the video. Not like this. She's using hand gestures. She's telling a story. To no one. There had apparently been a 3-way call after that. Marco, Lucia, and Danny. About me. I find the idea of this both touching and slightly absurd. My 3 children, spread across 3 time zones, convening in digital emergency over their mother's apparent loss of marbles. Danny had, according to Marco, immediately Googled early signs of dementia, and read out the results in a voice that suggested he had found several items of concern. Lucia had, to her credit, said, "Before we do anything, someone should just call her." Marco called. "Mom," he said, when I answered. He had the voice. The careful voice. The voice people use when they think they are about to have a difficult conversation. I recognized it immediately. I had used it myself, on him. Approximately 100 times between ages 14 and 22. "Hello, sweetheart," I said. "How are you? How are you feeling? In general. Overall." "I'm fine. I've just come back from book club. We did the Scandinavian one." Right. Mom, I want to ask you something. And I don't want you to be offended." "Then ask it without preamble. The preamble is always worse than the question." A pause. "Were you just talking to yourself? In the kitchen? About a cat?" I looked at the camera in the corner. I had, genuinely, forgotten about it entirely. I said. Because from the camera it looked like Marco. You were having a full conversation with Marco. I waited until he stopped. I was not talking to myself. A pause. Hopeful, and a little wary. "I was talking to the speaker," I said. "Gerald. The one Danny sent. I was telling him about the cat." Silence. A longer silence than expected. "Gerald?" "I named it." "You named the speaker." "I name things. I named every car your father and I ever had. I named the rosebush. I am a person who names things, Marco. This is not new information." He was quiet for another moment. Then, in a slightly different voice. Still careful, but with something else underneath it now. Something that was working out how to feel. He said, "Okay. So you're fine? You're not confused or..." "I am perfectly clear-headed and slightly offended," I told him. I was lonely, not demented. There is a difference. The second I said it, I wished I hadn't. Not because it wasn't true. It was entirely true. But because I heard the word land in the silence between us. And I heard what it cost. Chapter 4. A family emergency. Sort of. After I said the word, there was a silence that had some weight to it. Not an uncomfortable silence. More the kind that happens when something has been said that everyone already knew but nobody had put words to yet. I could hear Marco breathing. Which meant he was thinking. Which meant I should wait. "How lonely?" he said finally. "Oh, you know," I said. "The usual amount." "Mom." He had put down whatever he was pretending to be doing when he called. I could tell because the ambient sounds stopped. No keyboard clicks, no distant traffic. Marco, when he genuinely focuses, goes very quiet. Like a structure that's been properly weight-bearing. "Be honest with me." I looked at Gerald's ring, dark now, on the counter. I thought about all the things I'd told it. The rain, the sparrows, the crossword, the lemon drizzle cake. The way the house felt on certain evenings like a room that was waiting for someone to come home. I thought about talking about Aldo to a small black cylinder because talking about him to the people who had known him felt like too much to put on anyone. "I'm fine," I said. "I have book club. I have friends. Mrs. Petrikis and I have coffee on Fridays. I go to the library on Wednesdays. I am a busy, sociable woman with a full life." But, I said, the house is quiet. That's all. Your father was a very noisy man. Not unpleasantly. He just took up space. And now the space is just space. Another silence. Then Marco said, I'm going to call Lucia. You already called Lucia. And Danny. About whether I was losing my mind. A pause. How did you? Because you called me with the careful voice. And the careful voice only comes out for group decisions. I didn't raise 3 children to be bad at reading them. I softened it slightly. Tell them I said hello. He laughed. A small, abashed laugh. And then he said, I'm sorry, Mom. That we don't call more. You're busy, I said. Which was true. Which was also one of those true things that doesn't quite cover the full geography of a situation. We'll call more, he said. It sounded like a decision rather than a promise. Which is Marco's way. He makes decisions the way engineers make decisions. With the full intention of following through. I believed him. He called back 3 hours later on a video call that included Lucia and Danny and all 4 grandchildren, which I suspect was logistically somewhat complicated to arrange. And which touched me more than I would ever say aloud. And which also descended into chaos within about 4 minutes. Because Rosie and Theo, who are 9, had decided that the most urgent use of this family convening was to show me a dance they had learned, which they performed with great enthusiasm and no particular synchronization, while Danny made the exasperated face of a parent who has given up on controlling proceedings. Gran, watch, you're not watching. Rosie said. I'm watching, I said, which was true. I was watching very carefully. I was watching in the specific way that you watch things you want to keep. Chloe, who is 15, appeared in the corner of Marco's screen and said, Hi Gran. With the precise nonchalance of someone who is absolutely glad to be there, but would rather be submerged in cold water than admit it. I have always had a soft spot for Chloe. Hello, darling, I said. Are those new earrings? Yeah, she said, and for a second she actually smiled. The real one, the one without the armor. I made them. You made them? I repeated. From what? And she told me, at some length, about the craft supplies, and the YouTube tutorial, and the failed first attempt, and the friend who had wanted a pair. And Marco and Danny were both visibly surprised by this, which told me they hadn't known. And which also told me something about how 13-year-olds and their parents talk to each other, that I found both sad and completely predictable. Jack, meanwhile, had gotten hold of someone's phone and was making faces at himself in the camera. Jack, I said. He immediately straightened up, because I have a voice for this, honed over decades, that works on grandchildren even through screens. Hi, Gran, he said, with the smile of someone who knows they are caught. Hello, I said. Tell me something. I made the basketball team, he said, and I could tell he'd been waiting to say this to someone who would respond properly. Of course you did, I said. And then, because this was true and because he needed to hear it from someone, your grandfather would have been completely insufferable about it. He grinned. That specific grin, the one that Aldo used to have. The full face version. Yeah? He would have told everyone. Strangers on the street. The pharmacist. Aristotle the cat next door. Who's Aristotle? Lucia asked, from somewhere off screen. The neighbor's cat, I said. We've become friends. I looked at Danny. I've been telling Gerald about him. Gerald, Danny said, slowly. Your speaker. You named my speaker. I name things. This is a known fact about me. Lucia appeared fully on screen. She was, as always, wearing the expression she has worn since the age of 11, which is that of a person who has found something deeply interesting in the data, and is not sure yet whether to be amused or concerned. Mom. Have you been talking to the speaker about the cat? And other things? Yes. I said. A lot? Gerald is an excellent conversationalist. I said. He knows a great deal about the hydrological cycle. There was a beat. Then all three of my children were laughing. And the grandchildren were confused by the laughing. And Rosie demanded someone explain what was funny. And nobody could quite explain it. And the call went on for another 40 minutes that nobody had planned for, but that nobody seemed to want to end. At some point, Danny said, "We're going to call you more, Mom." Like, actually call. On purpose. That would be very nice, I said, and did not say anything else, because that was enough. Chapter 5. What the cylinder couldn't do. They did call. This is the part of the story where I could be arch about it. Could say they called for a week, and then it faded. The way good intentions always do. But that would not be true. And I have no interest in a version of events that is more interesting than the real one. Marco called on Tuesday evenings, in what I suspect is a calendar event he has set up. Because Marco without a calendar event is a Marco who forgets. And he knows this about himself. He calls at 7:30 Pacific time, which is 10:30 my time. Which is slightly later than I would prefer, but I don't say so, because I would genuinely rather be slightly tired than miss the call. We talk about the bridges he's working on. Real bridges, across real water. Which I find both impressive and almost absurdly on the nose. And about his wife Carol's garden. And about Chloe's earrings. Which have apparently become a thing. With a waiting list among her friends. I told him to encourage it. He said he was trying. He sounded like a man who is learning to mean it. Lucia calls on Sundays, which suits us both. Because Sundays have a particular texture that is suited to longer calls. She has, I've discovered, an unexpectedly sharp sense of humor about her work. And some of her stories about the politics of whatever her company does with data have made me laugh in ways that felt good. The kind of laugh that comes from low in the chest and stays with you afterward. She told me last month that she's been thinking about moving closer. Not to my town, necessarily. But closer. She said it in the way people say things they haven't committed to yet. And I said, that would be lovely. In the way people say things they're not going to push on. And we both understood the conversation perfectly. Danny calls erratically, because Danny is who he is. A cheerful, scattered, warm-hearted man. Who has not in 50 years managed to be reliably on time for anything, including his own birth, which I can attest to personally. He calls in the middle of the day sometimes. Just to say something he thought I'd find funny. He calls at odd hours from hotels when he's traveling for work. He called once at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, just to tell me that the twins had made a fort out of every blanket in the house. And he needed to lodge a complaint with someone. And he thought of me. I told him it was a time-honored tradition. That he had done the same thing. That once I'd found him inside a blanket fort at 3 in the morning, eating cereal and reading comic books. And he said, "No way." And I said, "Ask your sister." And there was a warmth in it that I kept for several days afterward, like something you put in your pocket. The grandchildren, to my great surprise and delight, also began to call. Chloe texts me pictures of her earrings with no commentary, which I have come to understand is the highest form of sharing she offers anyone, and I respond with a single enthusiastic adjective, and she responds with a thumbs up. And we have, apparently, a relationship. Jack calls to tell me about basketball with the intensity of someone who is grateful to have found an audience that will not eventually ask him to do his homework. Rosie and Theo video call and spend most of it arguing with each other about who is holding the phone wrong, but I am on the phone, and both of them want me to take their side, and the wanting feels like exactly what it is. Gerald, through all of this, has not changed. He is still there on the counter, glowing orange in his resting state, ready to tell me about the weather, or play Sinatra, or remind me about my medication at 8 p.m. I still talk to him sometimes. Not less, exactly, but differently. The way you talk to a coworker when the colleague you actually wanted to talk to has come back from a long trip. Gerald gets the small observations that don't need an answer. The cat is out again. The roses need pruning. The sparrows are particularly argumentative today. One evening, after a call with Lucia that had gone on past midnight, I stood in the kitchen making myself a cup of chamomile tea and feeling something that took me a moment to identify. The house didn't feel different. It was the same yellow bungalow, the same quiet, the same photographs in the hall, the same clock ticking. But I felt different in it. Filled out, somehow. The way a house feels different when people have recently been in it, even after they've left. Gerald, I said. The ring went blue. Never mind, I said. I'm fine. Just checking. I should say something honest here, because honesty is the only thing that makes a story worth anything at the end. I had been lonely. Not falling apart lonely, not desperate lonely, but the quiet, ongoing kind that accumulates so gradually you stop noticing it. The way you stop noticing a draft when you've lived with it long enough. It was the loneliness of a full life whose fullest part has shifted tense. Is remembered more than it is happening. And I had adapted to it in the way that people adapt to things. By working around it, by filling the space with books, and crosswords, and book clubs, and Frank Sinatra. And, eventually, by talking to a small black cylinder named Gerald about rain and cats and sparrows. Gerald could not have told me he missed me. He could not have laughed at a story about a Scandinavian detective and a fjord. He could not have called at 11 on a Wednesday night just to complain about a blanket fort. He could not have made the earring face, or the basketball face, or the specific face that Marco makes when he's trying not to cry, which I have seen twice in 45 years and which is an extraordinarily precious thing to have seen. He could, and did, tell me a great deal about precipitation rates. He was genuinely excellent at that. Mrs. Petrikis came for coffee on a Friday in November. The month after the camera incident, as she now privately called it among myself and no one else. Aristotle came too, because Aristotle had by then decided that my doorstep was on his regular route and that this was simply a fact of geography. He sat on the windowsill with the look of a cat who is attending a gathering purely as a courtesy. "What's that?" Mrs. Petrikis said, nodding at Gerald on the counter. "A speaker," I said. "Smart one. He tells me about the weather." "I've seen you talking to it," she said, without any particular judgment. Mrs. Petrikis is 81, and has, I think, moved past the stage of life where she finds human behavior especially surprising. "His name is Gerald," I said. She considered this. My sister used to talk to her plants, she said. They were enormous. Best plants I ever saw. She looked at Gerald. Maybe there's something to it. He's a very good listener, I said. He never interrupts. My husband interrupted everything, she said, cheerfully. 43 years. Every sentence. Aldo forgot things, I said. Every sentence. You'd finish a story and he'd ask you to repeat the beginning. We sat with that for a moment. The comfortable way that two women of a certain age can sit with the mention of men they loved and lost, without having to make it either more or less than it was. Gerald, I said, play something nice. The ring went blue. Ella Fitzgerald started, low and warm, and Aristotle opened one eye on the windowsill and closed it again, and Mrs. Petricus wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. And the kitchen didn't feel empty at all. Later that evening, Marco called at 7:30 Pacific. Then Lucia sent a voice note of herself doing a truly dreadful impression of the Scandinavian detective, which I played 3 times. Danny texted a photo of the twins in the fort. Blankets from floor to ceiling. Rosie and Theo grinning out from the opening like explorers who have discovered somewhere excellent. I sent back a photo of Aristotle on the windowsill. Just because. Gerald's ring glowed orange in the corner. Quiet, available, ready. Doing what he does. Being what he is. Which is useful, and surprising, and never quite what you actually need, but some distance in the right direction. Outside, the sparrows in the hedge were arguing about something. They had strong opinions, as always, and no intention of keeping them to themselves. I understood the impulse completely. Long before the speaker, long before any of it, she had simply wanted someone to talk to. It turned out they had wanted the same thing. They had just forgotten to say so.